I'll present understanding and applying the evidence base for strategic school actions for the school action of reassigning students. Strategic school actions are bold strategies that Texas districts can use to meet the unique needs of students in their communities. The 4 school actions include create a new school, redesign a school, restart a struggling school, or reassign students to a higher performing or new school. In this video, I will discuss research related to reassigning students to a higher performing or new school. The goal of reassigning students is to provide new learning opportunities at a higher performing school. When districts make the decision to close a low-performing school, reassigning students must involve a thoughtful process where parents and communities can understand the reasoning behind transitioning students to a new school. Districts should also allocate funds to support a smooth transition to a new school. The research presented in this video will discuss students experiencing a closure and reassignment, as well as the impacts of other school improvement models. There is very limited, well-designed, rigorous studies on the effects of reassignment on student outcomes. One quasi-experimental design study discusses the outcomes related to high school students being assigned to small schools of choice after the closure of 31 large failing high schools. Bloom and Unterman examined the effects of opening new high schools known as small schools of choice. This research study is actually part 3 of a 3-part series with a 3rd cohort of students being added to the study. There were over 12,000 students in 84 small high schools of choice. This study showed that small schools of choice in New York City continue to increase high school graduation rates for large numbers of disadvantaged students of color, even as graduation rates are rising at the schools in which the small schools were compared. In this 3rd installment of the study, new evidence was emerging that the small schools of choice may increase graduation rates for special education students and English language learners. However, given the still limited sample size for these subgroups, the evidence was not definite and more student cohorts will have to be added. The qualitative data of this particular study showed that the principals and teachers at 25 of the small schools of choice with the strongest evidence of effectiveness strongly believed that the academic rigor and personal relationships with students contributed to the effectiveness of their schools. One research summary and one quasi-experimental design study discussed the effects of school improvement models on student outcomes. Klute, Cherasaro, and Apthorp 2016 is a research summary article of 25 studies related to state interventions occurring at low-performing schools. The studies included were mostly descriptive, and the state interventions that were discussed were schools that had a turnaround partner intervention, schools that were involved in improvement planning, school redesign reform models, or closure reassignment reform models. The article included 25 articles, 10 which were located in California, and the majority of the studies were about schools with a turnaround partner. The authors described the components that led to school improvements. Turnaround partner interventions included a technical assistance provider that worked with the school to identify the school's needs, develop a school improvement plan, and provide technical assistance in implementing the plan. Other components that led to school improvement included strong leadership with the use of funding and action plans tied to the school's vision for improvement. The use of formative assessment data to guide instruction, as well as cultivating positive school culture characterized by trust and increased expectations from students. The De La Torre et al. Article discussed 5 distinct reform models that were implemented in Chicago public schools. The schools have been identified as chronically low performing by the district. The 5 distinct reform models that were implemented were reconstitution of the schools, school closure and restarts. Some schools implemented the School Turnaround Specialist Program, others implemented the Academy for Urban School Leadership, and some implemented the Chicago Public Schools Office of School Improvement Model. Again, the population was 36 intervention campuses, and the majority of the schools were predominantly African American. The study was quasi-experimental, and after 2 to 4 years, elementary schools that implemented reforms showed higher math and reading achievement gains compared to non-reform schools. This table displays the 4 school policy changes that were required as a part of the reform models. Some schools were required to replace their staff. Some had leadership replacement requirements. Some were required to replace their governance, and others had change in their attendance rules. For school closures and restarts, where new schools were created, they were required to change all 4 policies. This article, the De La Torre et al. Article, talking about the 5 school improvement models, does give a good description of what each of these models entail, as well as the relationship to student outcomes. One article summarizes a quasi-experimental design study to examine the effects of school improvement grant models. Dragoset et al. 2017 summarizes a research study of over 400 schools, with 270 of those that received school improvement grant funds. SIG-funded schools were required to implement improvement models such as transformation model, the turnaround model, reassignment and closure, or school restarts. This article provides a good description of these intervention models. It is a quasi-experimental design study, and the authors reported that the implementation of SIG models did not have significant impacts on math or reading test scores, high school graduation, or college enrollment rates. Here are a few takeaways based on the research presented in this video. Creating small schools of choice had a positive relationship with increased graduation rates for New York high school students. School reforms that include creating new schools through restructuring can have positive correlations with student performance outcomes, as reported by De La Torre et al. 2013. More rigorous research is needed to understand the impacts on academic outcomes of reassigning students to new schools. Here are the references for all of the research articles discussed in this video. If you have any questions about the material discussed in this video, please contact me, Kathy Terry. Thank you.